The distant sun of Proxima Centauri cast long purple shadows across the barren outpost, where Erika tended her small garden of bioluminescent fungi. Her slender fingers, adorned with the faded royal markings of her past status, worked methodically through the soil. 6 years had passed since her exile, 6 years since King Vorex had declared her unfit to serve the continuation of our species and banished her to this monitoring station at the edge of Centaurian territory. Erika's violet eyes scanned the horizon, a habit formed from years of solitude broken only by supply deliveries every 3 lunar cycles. Her humanoid form, 2 arms, 2 legs with skin the color of polished obsidian that reflected light in subtle blue patterns, moved gracefully despite the lingering pain in her side from her latest medical examination. The royal physicians had insisted on one final check before officially abandoning her to her fate. Biologically incompatible with His Majesty, they had proclaimed, as though she had willfully chosen to be barren, as though she hadn't desperately tried every fertility ritual on their world. The sudden streak of flame across the evening sky broke her reverie. Not a meteor. The trajectory was too controlled, too desperate. A ship was falling, and falling, fast. Erika grabbed her emergency pack and sprinted toward the crash site 3 kilometers from her outpost. The strange vessel had carved a smoking trench into the crystalline soil, its design unlike any Centaurian craft she'd ever seen. Human, perhaps. She'd only read about them in the royal archives before her disgrace. The hatch blew outward, and a figure stumbled out, coughing through the smoke. Definitely human, male from what she could determine, with copper-colored skin and dark hair. He collapsed as soon as he cleared the wreckage. Erika approached cautiously. Humans were rare in this system, and contact protocols were strict. But she was already an outcast. What more could they do to her? "Can you understand me?" she asked, kneeling beside him. The universal translator implanted during her royal education should work, but technology was unpredictable this far from the capital. The human groaned, clutching his side where a laceration leaked crimson blood. "Yes," he managed, eyes widening as he focused on her. "You're not what I expected to find out here." "I could say the same," Erika replied, applying pressure to his wound with a healing compress from her pack. "I am Erika. This outpost is my home." "Julian Reeves," he replied through gritted teeth. "Research medic. My navigation system failed during solar flare analysis." His eyes, a startling amber color, studied her face. "You're treating me without hesitation. Not typical first contact protocol." Erika helped him to his feet. "I was once first queen to King Vorex. I know the protocols. I simply no longer care to follow them." She supported his weight as they slowly made their way back to her outpost, the twin moons rising to light their path. Julian winced with each step but remained conscious. "First queen," he repeated. "Past tense?" "I was discarded," Erika said simply, the old humiliation burning anew. "I couldn't bear children for the king. Our species values fertility above all else." At her small dwelling, Erika helped Julian onto her medical cot. As she cleaned his wound properly, he surprised her by gently examining the half-healed incision. On her side, the mark of her final humiliation before exile. "This was done recently," he observed, his touch professional yet somehow more gentle than any Centaurian healer's had ever been. "Poor technique. It's infected. The royal physicians are more concerned with reproductive capability than proper wound care," she said bitterly. "When they confirmed I was still barren, they didn't bother closing it properly." Julian's expression darkened as he reached for his partially damaged medical kit salvaged from the crash. "May I?" he asked, holding up an instrument she didn't recognize. No one had asked her permission for anything in years. "Yes," she whispered. His touch was careful as he treated her wound, the strange warmth of human hands against her cool skin sending unexpected shivers through her body. "There," he said finally. "Much better. The antibacterial should clear the infection within hours." Thank you, Erika said, suddenly aware of how close he was, how long it had been since anyone had shown her kindness. But why help someone not of your species? Julian smiled, an expression that transformed his face. Where I come from, we heal because someone is in pain, not because of their reproductive value. Something long dormant stirred in Erika's chest. Not hope, she had abandoned that years ago, but perhaps its distant cousin. Possibility. 3 weeks had passed since Julian's crash landing, and Erika found herself studying him as he worked on repairing his ship's communication array outside her dwelling. The Centaurian suns beat down on his exposed shoulders, now tanned even darker, from the alien light. His movements were precise, methodical, a scientist's hands at work. Your physiology adapts quickly, she observed, approaching with a container of water infused with minerals his body needed. Julian had analyzed their compatibility himself, ensuring he could survive on her supplies. He looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. Evolution favored adaptability in humans. It's how we survived on Earth before reaching the stars. He accepted the water gratefully. Your people seem to have evolved differently, more specialized. Erika settled beside him, her obsidian skin reflecting purplish-blue patterns in the sunlight. The Centaurian way values purity and perfection. We don't adapt. We expect the universe to accommodate us. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Julian set down his tools. Tell me about your life before this place. No one had asked about her past since her exile. The words came hesitantly at first, then in a rush. I was selected as first, queen at 16 cycles, young even by our standards. King Vorax chose me for my lineage, my education, my supposed genetic compatibility. Erika traced patterns in the crystalline dust. For 3 years I underwent treatments, rituals, modifications, all to increase fertility. When nothing worked, the royal geneticists determined I had a rare mutation, incompatible with the royal bloodline. Julian frowned. And for that, they exiled you? They needed someone to blame for the continuing succession crisis. Better the defective queen than admit their king might be the source of the problem. She looked away. Queens who cannot produce heirs are considered worse than useless. They're considered cursed. Julian's hand moved as if to touch hers, then hesitated. Such contact was intimate by human standards, she had learned. She closed the distance, placing her cooler fingers against his warm ones. Your medical knowledge is extraordinary, she said, changing the subject. You treated my infection in days when our healers couldn't in months. He smiled, that expression that still fascinated her. I specialized in xenobiology, the study of non-human life. Your physiology is remarkable, actually. Your cellular regeneration alone could revolutionize human medicine. Yet I cannot do the one thing my species values most, she replied. Julian's eyes, those amber pools that seemed to catch the light of both suns, studied her face. Have your doctors ever considered that fertility isn't just about individual compatibility but environmental factors? Epigenetic triggers? Erika tilted her head. Explain. Julian's enthusiasm grew as he spoke, his hands gesturing animatedly. Some Earth species require specific environmental conditions to reproduce. Others need particular hormonal or chemical signals. He hesitated. I've been analyzing the medical scanner readings from when I treated your wound. Your reproductive system isn't non-functional, it's dormant. Something fluttered in Erika's chest. What are you saying? I'm saying, what if it's not that you can't bear children, but that you can't bear Centaurian children? What if your body is waiting for something different? The implication hung between them, heavy with possibility and taboo. That evening, as they shared a meal inside her dwelling, Erika noticed Julian studying the royal markings that still adorned her skin, intricate patterns that had once glowed brightly with her status, but had faded to dull traces. These patterns, he said softly, they're not just decorative, are they? Erika shook her head. They're bioluminescent indicators of hormonal and emotional states. Royal markings are more elaborate than those of common Centaurians. They've changed color since this morning, Julian observed. Arika glanced down, startled to see the faint blue glow emerging along her forearms, something that hadn't happened since before her exile. That's unusual. When did you last see them active? Like this? Julian asked, his scientific curiosity evident. Not since... She hesitated. Not since my time at court during formal ceremonies when emotional responses were heightened. Julian's gaze lingered on the patterns, which seemed to pulse slightly brighter under his attention. Fascinating. Your body is responding to something. Later, that night, unable to sleep, Arika found Julian outside, gazing at the stars. Do you miss your home? She asked, joining him. Parts of it, he admitted. But I've always felt more at home among the stars than on Earth. My research takes me to the boundaries, where different worlds meet. He turned to her. What about you? Do you miss the royal court? I miss having purpose, she answered honestly. Here, I exist merely to monitor equipment that rarely needs attention. I'm forgotten. Julian's hand found hers in the darkness. I see you, Arika. Not as a failed queen, but as an extraordinary being who survived what would have broken others. The markings on her skin pulsed brighter at his words, and with them came a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Something was awakening. Within her, something her body had kept dormant until now. Julian, she whispered, her voice strange to her own ears. I'm experiencing physiological changes when I'm near you. My markings, my internal temperature, even my sensory perception. It's all heightened. He stepped closer, the scientific observer temporarily replaced by something more primal. I've noticed changes in myself too. Increased heart rate, altered brain chemistry. His fingers traced the glowing pattern on her arm, sending shimmers of light cascading across her skin. I think our bodies are communicating. The air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Arika had never felt this with any Centaurian, not even the king. This wasn't the clinical reproduction expected of a royal match. This was something ancient and powerful. I should analyze these reactions, Julian murmured, though he made no move to retrieve his equipment. Yes, Arika agreed, even as she stepped closer to him. We should understand what's happening. But understanding would wait until morning. For now, beneath the alien stars, something new was beginning. A connection neither of their species had anticipated, but which their bodies seemed to recognize on a cellular level. And as Julian's warm hands cupped her face, Arika felt her royal markings illuminate like never before, casting their joined shadows in brilliant blue across the crystalline ground. Morning light filtered through the crystal panels of Arika's dwelling, casting rainbow patterns across the floor, where data tablets and medical instruments lay scattered. For the past week, Julian had been meticulously documenting the changes in both their physiologies, changes that defied explanation by either human or Centaurian medical science. Arika watched him from across the room, her markings pulsing with a steady blue glow that hadn't dimmed since their first intimate encounter, beneath the stars. She no longer tried to hide it. Out here, there was no one to judge her for responding to an alien. Your hormonal readings have shifted again, Julian said, studying his scanner. His voice remained professional, but his eyes, when they met hers, held the heat of memory. Your body is producing compounds I've never seen before. Is that concerning? Arika moved beside him, her cool skin brushing against his arm. Even this casual contact sent ripples of light across her markings. Not concerning, Julian replied, setting down the scanner. Remarkable. Your dormant reproductive system is showing signs of activity. Cell division has increased in your... He paused, searching for the right word. Equivalent to a human uterus. Arika's breath caught. That's impossible. The royal geneticists were certain. They were certain you couldn't reproduce with Centaurians, Julian corrected gently. They never considered cross-species compatibility. The implications hung between them, too enormous to fully comprehend. Arika turned away, moving to the window that overlooked the barren landscape she'd called home for 6 years. Even suggesting such a thing would be considered abomination by my people, she whispered. The royal bloodline has remained pure for 10,000 cycles. Julian approached her from behind, close enough that she could feel his warmth without touching. Perhaps that's why your species faces a fertility crisis. Perhaps you need new genetic material. Adaptation rather than purity. She turned to face him. Is that how you see what's happening between us? A scientific solution to a biological problem? His expression softened as he reached up to trace the curve of her face. You know it's more than that. The memory of their nights together flickered between them. The discovery of how their bodies could join despite their differences. The surprising compatibility of their most sensitive places. The way her markings had illuminated the darkness, around them as pleasure built and crested. I've never experienced anything like what we share, Julian admitted, his scientific detachment falling away. This isn't just physical attraction or curiosity. Something about you calls to me on a level I don't fully understand. Arika leaned into his touch. When I was queen, intimacy was a duty performed for genetic purpose. There was no joy in it, no connection. Her markings pulsed brighter. With you, I feel everything. Julian's kiss was gentle at first, then hungry with need. Arika responded with equal fervor, her markings flaring brilliantly as his hands found the sensitive places along her spine. They moved together toward her sleeping area, research forgotten in the heat of desire. Later, as they lay entwined, Julian traced the patterns on her abdomen, which now glowed with an intensity she'd never experienced before her exile. Your body is preparing for something, he murmured against her skin. These patterns, they're changing configuration. Arika studied the swirling lights. These markings typically indicate major physiological shifts in Centaurian females. They appeared when I reached maturity, then changed when I was selected as queen. She hesitated. But this pattern, I've never seen it before. Julian's scientific curiosity returned. May I take more readings? There's something happening on a cellular level that could be revolutionary. She nodded, watching as he retrieved his medical scanner and passed it slowly over her glowing abdomen. His expression shifted from concentration to astonishment. Arika, he said carefully, your reproductive system isn't just active, it's adapting. Your cellular structure is altering to accommodate human genetic material. Her eyes widened. That should be impossible. Apparently your body disagrees, Julian replied, setting down the scanner to take her hands in his. Your species evolved to be adaptable in ways your rulers have forgotten or suppressed. Perhaps this is how Centaurians survived catastrophic events in your ancient past by adapting to new genetic possibilities when necessary. Arika sat up, her mind racing. If what you're saying is true, then everything I was taught about our biological imperative, about royal bloodlines and genetic purity, could be the very thing threatening your species' survival, Julian finished. The revelation settled between them, enormous in its implications. If Arika's body could adapt to human biology, could other Centaurians do the same? Could the answer to their fertility crisis lie not in maintaining genetic purity, but in embracing diversity? We need to document everything, she said suddenly, her scientific training asserting itself. If what's happening to me could help others, a sharp alarm cut through the moment. The perimeter alert system, dormant for years, had activated. Arika rushed to the monitoring station, Julian close behind. On the screen, a royal transport ship descended toward the outpost, its insignia unmistakable. The personal guard of King Vorax. How did they know? Arika whispered, fear clutching at her heart. No one monitors this outpost. Julian's expression darkened. My distress signal. When I crashed, it would have broadcast my location to any ships in the system. He touched her arm gently. I'm so sorry. Arika straightened, the posture of a queen returning to her body. They've come for you. Humans are rare in this system. Valuable. For scientific study. Her voice hardened. And if they discover what's happening between us, we don't have to let them find out, Julian said, moving quickly to gather his research data. We can hide the evidence, claim I've been living separately, working on my ship. They'll scan me, Erika interrupted, her markings dimming with dread. Standard protocol for any Centaurian who's had contact with off-worlders. They'll see the changes immediately. Julian's jaw tightened as he looked at the approaching ship. Then we have two choices. Hide and hope they believe whatever story we create, or face them with the truth and what it might mean for your entire species. Erika's markings pulsed once, bright and defiant, before settling into a steady glow. There is a third option, she said quietly. You could leave now. Your ship's engines are repaired. You could escape before they land. Julian's eyes met hers, his decision already made. I'm not leaving you to face this alone. Outside, the Royal Transport's engines grew louder as it prepared to land. Erika reached for Julian's hand, their fingers intertwining. Human warmth against Centaurian coolness, a forbidden connection that might change everything. Then we face them together, she said, squaring her shoulders. And we show them exactly what their fallen queen has discovered. The Royal Transport's landing strut settled into the crystalline soil with a hiss of hydraulics, sending plumes of iridescent dust skyward. Erika stood tall beside Julian at the entrance to her dwelling, her markings glowing defiantly despite her attempt to dim them through controlled breathing. 6 royal guards emerged first, their ceremonial armor glinting in the harsh sunlight, followed by a figure that made Erika's breath catch, Talon, the king's chief geneticist and the architect of her exile. First Queen Erika, Talon called, using her former title with obvious mockery. How unexpected to find you in the company of an off-worlder. His silver eyes flicked to Julian, assessing and cold. Especially such an unusual specimen. Research medic Julian Reeves. Julian introduced himself with practiced diplomacy. My ship crashed nearby. Queen Erika provided humanitarian assistance. Talon's thin lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. How generous of our disgraced queen. And how interesting that you refer to her by her former title. He gestured to the guards. Secure the human's vessel and equipment. Standard quarantine protocols. 2 guards moved toward Julian's partially repaired ship while others approached the dwelling. Erika stepped forward, her royal training evident in her commanding posture. The human poses no threat to Centaurian security, she stated firmly. His presence here is merely coincidental. Talon circled her slowly, his attention fixed on her glowing markings. Coincidental? I think not. Your biological indicators suggest otherwise, Erika. He reached out suddenly, grasping her wrist to examine the patterns more closely. Fascinating. These patterns shouldn't be possible in your condition. Julian tensed beside her but remained silent, understanding that interference could make matters worse. Release me, Erika demanded, her voice carrying the authority she had once wielded at court. Surprisingly, Talon complied, though his expression remained calculating. The king will be most interested in these developments. Both of you will return with us to the capital immediately. On what grounds? Julian asked, his scientific demeanor masking his concern. Violation of quarantine protocols, unauthorized contact with Centaurian citizens, potential biological contamination, Talon listed dismissively. But more importantly, something much more valuable. His gaze fixed on Erika's abdomen, where her markings formed their unfamiliar new pattern. Discovery. The capital city of Vexron sprawled beneath the transport's viewports, its crystal spires and bioluminescent architecture as breathtaking as Erika remembered. 6 years had changed little in its appearance, though she noted newer structures around the Royal Science Academy, always the center of the kingdom's power, more so than even the palace itself. Julian stood beside her at the viewport, his hand discreetly brushing against hers. They had been permitted to remain together during the journey, though under constant surveillance. Talon had spent the 3-day flight conducting preliminary scans on both of them, his excitement growing with each new reading. They're taking us to the academy, not the palace, Erika murmured, concern creeping into her voice. That's unexpected. Is that better or worse? Julian asked quietly. Both, she replied. The scientists might be more interested in understanding what's happening than in punishing us for it, but they're also more likely to view us as specimens rather than people. The transport docked at a private bay, and they were escorted through sterile corridors to a laboratory complex Erika had never seen despite her years as queen. Guards positioned themselves at the doors while Talon directed them to separate examination platforms. "We require individual baseline readings," he explained, signaling technicians forward. "Standard procedure." Julian met Erika's eyes across the room, his expression conveying a silent message. "Cooperate for now. Gather information." For hours they endured separate examinations, blood draws, tissue samples, and scans. Erika overheard fragments of excited conversation among the scientists. Phrases like cellular reconfiguration and adaptive genomics that confirmed Julian's theories about what was happening to her body. Finally, Talon returned, accompanied by a delegation of senior scientists, and at their center a figure that sent a chill through Erika's body. King Vorex himself. The king had aged in the 6 years since her exile, his once vibrant markings dulled with stress, and his posture slightly stooped. Yet his eyes retained their penetrating intelligence as they fixed on her glowing patterns. "So," he said, his deep voice resonating through the laboratory, "my discarded queen has discovered something my geneticists could not." He approached, her examination platform studying her with clinical detachment. "You've adapted to human biology." Erika met his gaze without flinching. "It appears so, Your Majesty." Vorex turned to Julian, who had been brought to stand nearby. "And you, human, you've accomplished what no Centaurian male could." Julian remained diplomatic but firm. "With respect, Your Majesty, I didn't accomplish anything. Erika's body has remarkable adaptive capabilities that were always within her. Capabilities that may exist in all Centaurians but have been suppressed by generations of genetic isolation." Talon stepped forward eagerly. "The human is correct, Your Majesty. Our preliminary findings suggest the Queen's reproductive system has reconfigured itself to accommodate cross-species fertilization. It's unprecedented, and potentially the solution to our succession crisis," added another scientist, her excitement palpable. The king's expression remained unreadable as he circled the examination platform. "Is she fertile then? Can she bear children now?" "All indicators suggest reproductive capability has been restored," Talon confirmed. "But only with human genetic material, it seems. The adaptation is specific." Vorex's eyes narrowed. "Can we replicate this adaptation in other females? Can we synthesize the process?" "With sufficient research, possibly," Talon replied. "We would need extensive samples from the human biological materials that could—" "I haven't agreed to any of this," Julian interrupted, his diplomatic tone hardening. "And neither has Erika." The laboratory fell silent as all eyes turned to the human who had dared interrupt the king. Vorex regarded Julian with newfound interest. "You misunderstand your position, human," he said quietly. "You are not being asked to agree. The genetic material your body produces could save my species from extinction. One life weighed against millions. The calculation is simple." Erika felt cold dread spread through her body. "Your Majesty, forced extraction violates all interstellar medical ethics protocols. Earth authorities would consider it an act of war." The king waved a dismissive hand. "Earth is light years away, and one missing researcher would hardly provoke interstellar conflict." His attention returned to Talon. "Begin preparations. I want viable extraction procedures developed immediately." "And what of the Queen?" Talon asked, glancing at Erika. Vorex considered her, his expression softening fractionally. "She will be returned to her royal apartments. Her condition will be monitored closely. If she is indeed carrying a viable offspring, it may prove valuable for research." Erika's markings flared with anger and fear. "I am not a specimen to be studied," she said, her voice cutting through the laboratory. "Neither is Julian." The king's eyes hardened again. "You forfeited your right to self-determination when you failed in your duty as queen. Now it seems you may finally serve a purpose." He gestured to the guards. Take them to their assigned quarters. Double security on the human. He's too valuable to risk escape attempts. As guards moved to separate them, Julian lunged forward, grasping Erika's hand briefly. His fingers pressed something small and hard into her palm, a data crystal from his equipment. Their eyes met for only a moment before guards pulled them apart. "Tomorrow," Vorex announced to his scientists as Julian was led away, "we begin harvesting genetic material. Prepare your laboratories." Erika clutched the hidden crystal tightly as guards escorted her from the laboratory. Behind the fear and anger churning within her, a plan began to form. The king had made a critical error by bringing her back to the palace, a place she knew intimately, where she still had allies among the servants and lower-ranking scientists. She was led through familiar corridors toward her old apartments. Erika's markings pulsed with determination. Julian had trusted her with something important. Now she had to find a way to use it and to save them both before morning came. In her quarters, finally alone, Erika examined the tiny crystal Julian had pressed into her hand. It contained not only their research data but something else. Access codes to his ship's emergency beacon. A direct link to Earth authorities. All she needed was access to a communications array. Erika's hand moved unconsciously to her abdomen, where her markings continued their strange new pattern. The king didn't know everything, neither did Talon. The changes in her body were more profound than their scans had revealed, changes she and Julian had discovered in those final hours before the royal ship arrived. There was a reason her body had adapted so quickly, a reason her markings had formed this specific pattern. If their theory was correct, she wasn't just theoretically capable of bearing children with Julian, she already was. Dawn broke over the crystal spires of Vexron, bathing the royal palace in amber light. Erika stood at the window of her former royal apartments, her hand pressed against the transparent barrier that now sealed her inside. 6 years in exile had changed her, stripped away the naive obedience that had once made her an ideal queen. Now that transformation would save them both. The night had not been wasted. Using hidden passages known only to royal consorts, Erika had made contact with Mela, her former handmaiden who had secretly maintained loyalty through the years of exile. Through Mela, messages had been sent to members of the Scientific Ethics Coalition, a group of younger researchers who questioned the increasingly desperate reproductive experiments sanctioned by the king. Erika turned as the door to her chamber slid open. Talon entered, flanked by 2 medical technicians pushing equipment. His silver eyes gleamed with scientific fervor. "The preliminary extraction procedure begins in 2 hours," he announced without preamble. "These technicians will prepare you for observation during the process." "And where is Julian?" Erika asked, her markings carefully controlled to reveal nothing of her plans. "The human is being prepared separately," Talon replied dismissively. "His cooperation is not required for the procedure." Erika allowed worry to show on her face, a calculated display. "His physiology is delicate compared to ours. Your procedures could harm him." "Your concern is noted but unnecessary," Talon said, gesturing for the technicians to begin setting up monitoring equipment. "We've studied human biology extensively. He will survive the extractions, though comfort is not our priority." As the technicians approached with scanning devices, Erika subtly shifted her position, allowing her royal markings to pulse once, brightly, a signal to Mela who watched through the surveillance system. The plan was now in motion. "You should know," Erika said carefully, "that the adaptation process is more complex than your preliminary scans suggest." Talon paused, his scientific curiosity piqued. "Explain." "Julian and I documented physiological changes that your equipment isn't calibrated to detect," she continued, "changes that could be vital to your research." "What changes?" Talon stepped closer, suspicion warring with scientific interest. Erika met his gaze directly. "Cellular communication between our species occurs on quantum levels. Without proper calibration, your extraction will yield incomplete genetic material, useless for your purposes." It was a calculated risk, part truth, part scientific bluff. Julian had indeed discovered unusual quantum patterns in their cellular communication, though they hadn't fully understood the implications. Talon's eyes narrowed. "You're attempting to delay the procedure." "I'm attempting to ensure its success," Erika countered. "Bring Julian here. Let him explain the calibration requirements. Otherwise, you risk wasting the king's only viable option." Before Talon could respond, alarms blared throughout the complex. The laboratory's communication system activated automatically. "Security breach in human containment," announced an automated voice. "All science personnel report to emergency stations." Talon cursed, ordering the technicians to remain with Erika as he rushed from the chamber. The moment the door sealed behind him, Erika turned to the technicians, both wearing the subtle blue wristbands that identified them as coalition sympathizers. "Now," she said simply. One technician deactivated the surveillance system while the other produced a small device that disabled the room's locking mechanism. Within moments, they were moving through servant corridors toward the communications hub. "Julian has been moved to the secondary laboratory," the female technician whispered. As they navigated the passages, coalition members staged the containment breach as distraction. "The ship?" Erika asked. "Secured by royal guards, but we've established a direct link to the Earth Embassy on Proxima Station," the male technician replied. "We need only transmit the data crystal's contents." They reached the communications hub, normally heavily guarded but now vacant as security forces responded to the staged breach. Erika inserted Julian's data crystal into the transmission array, initiating the emergency protocols he had programmed. "How long until transmissions are detected?" she asked. 3 minutes at most," the female technician replied, working quickly to establish secure channels. "The coalition forces are moving into position now." On the monitor, Erika watched as the data streamed outward, not just their research findings, but evidence of the forced extraction procedures planned for Julian, direct violations of the interspecies medical ethics treaty that Centauri had signed decades ago. A sudden commotion outside the communications hub signaled their time was running short. The male technician finished the transmission just as the doors burst open, revealing royal guards led by King Vorex himself. "Treason," the king hissed, his markings flaring with rage as he took in the scene. "From my own queen." Erika stood tall, her markings glowing defiantly. "Not treason, Vorex, evolution. The very process our ancestors embraced before your line decided purity was more important than survival." The king advanced, signaling the guards to seize her. "You've doomed us." "All Earth will retaliate." "Earth already knows," interrupted a familiar voice. Julian appeared in the doorway behind the king, supported by coalition scientists. Though weakened from the preliminary procedures, his eyes burned with determination. "The transmission is complete. Earth authorities have the evidence and are dispatching diplomatic vessels now." Vorex whirled, disbelief etched on his features. "How did you—" "Your Majesty," called Talon, rushing into the increasingly crowded communications hub. "We've analyzed the Queen's latest scans. She's—" He stopped abruptly, realizing the situation had changed. "I'm carrying a child," Erika finished for him, her hands moving to her abdomen where her markings formed their unique pattern. "The first of what could be many successful adaptations between our species." The revelation settled over the room like a physical force. Vorex stared at her abdomen, centuries of royal conditioning warring with the scientific reality before him. "Impossible," he whispered. "Evidently not," Julian replied, moving to stand beside Erika. "Your species' fertility crisis was never about genetic failure. It was about genetic isolation. You've been inbreeding your royal lines for so long that you've suppressed the very adaptive mechanisms that allowed Centaurians to survive previous extinction events." Coalition scientists moved forward, their leader addressing the king directly. "Your Majesty, the evidence is irrefutable. Queen Erika's adaptation provides a path forward for our people, but not through forced extraction or unethical experimentation." For a long moment, King Vorex stood immobile, the weight of centuries of tradition visibly pressing upon him. Then, unexpectedly, his shoulders sagged. "How long have we been wrong?" he asked, his voice suddenly old and tired. "How many queens have I discarded, believing them flawed when the flaw was in our understanding?" "It's not too late to change course," Arika said, gentler now. "My child will be the first of a new approach. Voluntary genetic diversity that strengthens, rather than weakens, our people." Outside the communications hub, commotion grew as word spread through the palace. Centaurian citizens, having heard rumors of the exiled queen's return and miraculous fertility, gathered in increasing numbers, their collective markings visible even from the high windows as a sea of bioluminescent patterns. Talon, ever the pragmatist, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, the people are gathering. They've heard about the Queen. If Earth vessels are truly on their way, we must present a unified response." The king's gaze moved from Arika to Julian, then to the growing crowd below. "What would you have me do?" he asked, the question directed at both of them. "Announce the truth," Julian replied simply. "That Centaurian biology is more adaptable than previously believed. That genetic diversity offers hope where isolation brought decline." "And the child?" Vorex asked, looking at Arika's glowing markings. "Will be born free," she said firmly. "Not a royal specimen, but the first citizen of a new approach to Centaurian society, one where adaptation is celebrated rather than feared." 3 months later, Arika stood on the balcony of the newly established Interspecies Research Center, watching as human and Centaurian scientists worked side by side in the gardens below. The diplomatic crisis had been averted through a combination of scientific cooperation agreements and public acknowledgement of past ethical violations. King Vorex, in a stunning reversal of centuries of tradition, had officially recognized Arika's child as legitimate, though not as royal heir. That suited Arika perfectly. Royal succession no longer seemed important in a society rapidly evolving beyond its rigid hierarchies. Julian joined her on the balcony, his arm slipping naturally around her waist. His position as Earth's official scientific liaison gave him diplomatic status, allowing them to build their relationship openly. "The latest results are promising," he said, his fingers tracing the increasingly elaborate patterns on her abdomen. 3 more Centaurian females have shown adaptive responses to genetic diversity therapy. Arika leaned into his warmth, her markings brightening at his touch, a response she no longer attempted to hide. "And the Ethical Oversight Committee?" "Fully established. Earth and Centauri representatives with equal authority." He smiled, the expression she had once found so alien now beloved and familiar. No more forced procedures, no more discarded queens. Below them, the first group of incompatible females, women who, like Arika, had been deemed failures by the old system, arrived for voluntary participation in the adaptation research program. Many would likely discover, as Arika had, that their bodies weren't flawed, merely waiting for the right genetic complement. She moved again, Arika murmured, placing Julian's hand where their daughter kicked vigorously against her womb. Their child, genetically both human and Centaurian, with cellular structures never before documented in either species. Strong, Julian observed proudly. Like her mother, Arika turned in his arms, her royal markings now permanently transformed into the patterns of new life and new possibilities. Like both her parents, she corrected, adaptable, resilient. Beyond the research center, the crystal spires of Vexaran gleamed in the dual sunlight, unchanged yet viewing a society in transformation. What had begun as an exile's isolation and a medic's crash landing had catalyzed the evolution of an entire civilization. "Do you ever regret it?" Arika asked softly. "Crashing here, becoming part of all this?" Julian's answer was to draw her closer, his lips finding hers in the intimate connection that had first awakened her dormant biology. When they parted, his amber eyes held nothing but certainty. "Some crashes," he murmured against her luminescent skin, "are actually landings in disguise." Arika's markings pulsed in agreement, casting their joined shadows across the balcony in patterns as new and unprecedented as the future they were creating. Together,